Okay, so the first question that we've got tonight is this. What was the cup in Jeremiah chapter 49 and verse number 12? And how is the cup used in other places in the Bible? Okay, so let's start in Jeremiah chapter 49 and verse number 12. And it says this. It says, "This is what the Lord says. If those who do not deserve to drink the cup must drink it, why should you go unpunished? You will not go unpunished, but you must drink it." Okay? So, we're going to look at that. We're going to look at other places in the Bible. And at the same time, I think that this question is kind of a good way for us to just simply talk about, talking about this question, understanding it. But more than that, to look and see a little bit of some principles about Bible interpretation. Specifically, there's going to be some words that we see in the Bible that can have a symbolic reference. And so how do we interpret those words or those concepts as we find them in the Bible? Really, as we go through this, I want you to kind of see that it really just kind of makes a whole lot of sense, and it really is a lot of common sense when you stop to think about it. And when you think about the prime objective, and that is, what did the original writer mean when he spoke to the original recipients? If we kind of keep that in the, as the baseline of what we're talking about, then the other stuff kind of makes sense too, okay? All right, so when we look at things like that, the number one thing that we need to take in consideration is that word, context. Okay, in fact, a quote that I remember one time was, "A text without a context is only a pretext." And so, kind of keep that in mind. All right, so when we look at this and we look at this word in verse number 12, it says, "You must drink the cup." We kind of need to understand a little bit about the context about what's going on. So in verse number 12, where it says, "This is what the Lord says, if those who do not deserve to drink the cup must drink it, why would you go unpunished?" And so our immediate thoughts are what? Our immediate thoughts are, what is this cup that the Lord is talking about, right? Here is the Lord saying, you must drink this cup. And we're like, okay, wait a minute. The ones that don't deserve to drink the cup must drink it, or go unpunished. That, we're like, okay, what in the world is that? Okay. A lot of times, if we'll just simply read what's around it, or even kind of do a word search and look for similar things in the book itself, we can kind of come up with it, because especially when you think about a book as big as Jeremiah is, it could be that topic is somewhere else and it is being brought back up. And that's really what's going on with the case here. And so let's go back to take a look at Jeremiah chapter 25, okay? So in Jeremiah chapter 25, what we see is this. When we look at Jeremiah chapter 25, we see that Jeremiah is prophesying to the people of Judah, and he's really saying that, and this is in the first year of King Nebuchadnezzar, he's saying that because the Lord sent him to speak to the people of Judah were not listening, that the Lord was going to summon his servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and the king of Babylon was going to bring judgment against the land, and not only Israel, but against all the other surrounding nations. And it's also interesting that as we continue to read through this, we see that this judgment of the Lord for the tribe of Judah is going to be 70 years. And that is something that, as Daniel was in Babylonian captivity, he was reading that, he was understanding, hey, the 70 years is about over, okay? And so in verse number 12, he says, "But when the 70 years are fulfilled, I will punish the king of Babylon and his nation in the land of Babylon for their guilt, declares the Lord, and I will make it desolate forever. I will bring upon that land all the things I have spoken against it, all that are written in this book and are prophesied by Jeremiah against the nations. They themselves will be enslaved by many other nations and great kings, and I will repay them according to their deeds and the work of their hands. Now going to verse number 15, we see, he's now going back to what he's talking about as far as the judgment of other peoples. He says, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me. Take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. When they drink it, they will stagger and go mad because of the sword I will send among them." Okay. Now, when we come across something like this, in this case, the word cup, one thing that we need to think about is, okay, is this literal or is this figurative, right? A good rule of thumb is this: you need to treat something as literal unless there is something in the context that tells you otherwise. If there's something in the context that tells you it is figurative, then you look at it in a figurative sense. If there's nothing in the context that says it's figurative, then you need to kind of look at it literal, because if you start to take something that's meant to be literal, how the people originally meant it, then if you start to take it and then you start to make it figurative, then you can go to all kinds of different areas, right? Areas that God never intended. But if you look at it and you say, wait a minute, there's something here that tells me it's not meant to be literal, it's supposed to be figurative, then you start to follow those little breadcrumbs, right? Now, is there anything in what we just read that makes you think that this is figurative and not literal?
The part where it says, with the wine of my wrath.
Okay, so there we've got right there, it's wine of his wrath, so we're really not talking about it literal in that regard. Here's something else, and that is that Jeremiah was asked to take from the Lord's hand this cup and then make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. Okay, now we read on down and we see these nations. Okay, and so in verse number 18, it says, "Jerusalem and the towns of Judah, its kings and officials, to make them a ruin and an object of horror and scorn and cursing as they are today. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and his attendants, officials, and all his people, and all the foreign people there, all the kings of Uz, all the kings of the Philistines, those of Ashkelon, as Gaza, Ekron, and the people left at Ashdod, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, all the kings of Tyre and Sidon, the kings of the coastland across the sea, Dedan, Tema, Buz, and all who are in distant places, all the kings of Arabia, and all the kings of foreign people who live in the desert, all the kings of Zimri, Elam, Media, and all the kings in the north, near and far, one after the other, all the kingdoms on the face of the earth, and after all of them, the king of Sheshach will drink it too." Sheshach is Babylon, okay? Now, not to go back and take a look at all these countries, all these nations, but there's a lot of them, aren't there? And they're really scattered all over the place. Some are very far from Jeremiah. Arabia, Media, which is, the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, conquered Babylon, and they were east of Babylon. What do you suppose that Jeremiah, if we're talking about a literal cup here, that Jeremiah could go to all these kings and kingdoms and say, "Here, drink this cup"?
Right, that can't happen, or probably can't.
More than likely, how is he going to get all those places? And secondly, how is he going to gain access to them too? Pharaoh, king of Egypt. "Hey, Pharaoh, I want you to drink this cup." Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, "Hey, you better drink this cup." And this is what you're supposed to tell them. Verse 27, "Tell them, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Drink, get drunk, and vomit, and fall, and rise no more, because the sword I am send among you. But if they refuse to take the cup from your hand and drink it, tell them, this is what the Lord Almighty says, you must drink it." So it's kind of like, "Here, Pharaoh, drink this cup." "No, don't want to do it." "No, you have to do it." So this isn't really a literal cup that Jeremiah is going and literally having them drink. What do you suppose this cup is?
It's a message from God.
Okay, a message God about what? Judgment. Okay, so this is, as you pointed out earlier, Carol, is that this is the wine of my wrath that all the nations are going to drink. And even if they refuse to drink it, it doesn't matter. It's going to happen. And the reason is God is taking Nebuchadnezzar and he is having Nebuchadnezzar go through the land, and he's going to conquer all of these people and expand his empire. But last but not least, as we read in the previous verses, the Lord is going to judge him too. And so there's that last king of Shishak will drink it as well. And so when we think about this cup of God's wrath, what are we thinking at this point?
What is it making us think of?
Yeah.
It makes me think of Jesus whenever he prayed and said, take this cup from me. If it can't, then you're not my will, but yours.
Okay. Let's put a pin in that, and let's stick back here, because we are going to kind of come back around to the New Testament in just a second. But right here, we're talking about, here is this cup of God's wrath. Here is something that, he is angry. He's going to have the judgment. And he is saying, you have to drink this. And then when they drink it, they're going to drink so much that they're going to get drunk. They're going to stagger. They're going to fall down. Meaning literally, no. But figuratively, meaning that when God comes in and judges all these countries, they're going to be defeated and they're going to fall down. They're going to rise back up, but they're going to fall down, not with actual alcohol, but they're going to fall down with a sword. Okay? Now, that kind of makes sense in this passage, doesn't it? Okay, so when we think about this idea about, concepts and symbols in the Bible, it's really easy to say, okay, well, here is what God is inspiring, in this case, Jeremiah to write about this cup. And so from here on out, we can be noticing this in the book of Jeremiah. Now, does this mean that every time the word cup is used in the book of Jeremiah, this is what it's talking about? Well, no. In fact, I don't know how many times the word cup is, but there's going to be times that it's like, no, this is not a metaphoric cup, not a symbolic cup. It's a literal cup. Because again, we come back to that rule of interpretation. Number one is that you take it literal if it's meant to be literal, but if there's indication it's symbolic, then you take it that way. Okay? All right. So here is in chapter 25. Now let's go back to chapter 49. And let's see how this concept is going to come back around again. Now, it helps if we're looking at one verse to kind of go and look at verses around it, and we can kind of pick up on some other things. And so here is in chapter 48, 49, judgments against some of these same nations that were in chapter 25. And it says in verse number 7, concerning Edom, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Is there no longer wisdom in Teman? Has counsel perished from the prudent? Has their wisdom decayed? Turn and flee, hide in the deep cave, you who live in Dedan. For I will bring disaster on Esau at the time I punish him. So all these places, that is Teman, Dedan, are cities within Edom. Edom is descended from Esau, and so, you get the idea, Edom country, Esau, same thing, and then these different cities. And so this judgment is going to be coming upon them. Now, verse number 9, it says, if grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? If thieves came during the night, would they not steal only as much as they wanted? But I will strip Esau bare. I will uncover his hiding places so that he cannot conceal himself. His children, relatives, and neighbors will perish, and he will be no more. Okay, so the judgment that's going to be coming upon them through all of this is going to be very extensive and very severe, right? But if we look at verse number 11, it says, leave your orphans, I will protect their lives. Your widows can trust me too. And so, the ones that are the absolute helpless in society, the Lord is going to watch out and protect them. Now we look at verse number 12, and it says this. This is what the Lord says. If those who do not deserve to drink the cup must drink it. Now, stopping right there, and you think about what we just read about this extensive judgment that went on with Edom. Do you think that there would have been people in Edom that would have been judged that really didn't deserve the same kind of judgment as other people? I mean, there's people in Edom that were quite wicked and doing bad things and needed to be judged. But when you look at a whole thing of people, a nation of people, not each one is the same, and not everyone's going to rise the same level as others. And so, if we're talking about judgment, and when an invading army comes in, there's going to be casualties of war. There's going to be starvation. There's going to be hardship. There's going to be all kinds of horrible things that happen in war. There's going to be people that are taken captive. There's going to be, people who are slaughtered and everything like that. So, here's some people saying, well, okay, here's these people that really didn't deserve this cup of the Lord, but that's not the point. He says, if those who do not deserve to drink the cup must drink it, why should you go unpunished? You will not go unpunished, but must drink it. I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that Bozrah will become a ruin and an object of horror, of reproach, of cursing, and all its towns will be in ruins forever. So he's saying, look, if even the ones that didn't deserve to get this punishment, this judgment, are getting punished, then how about all the ones that do deserve it? They're especially going to get it. Okay? All right. So does that kind of answer the question as far as what this means in the book of Jeremiah and what we're talking about here? Okay? All right. Now, so here we've got this concept in the book of Jeremiah about this cup of God's wrath. But, when we go to other places in the Bible, we look at it and can we see similar things? And yeah, we can, because when you think about God being the ultimate author of the Bible, a lot of the same concepts, a lot of the same symbolisms that are going to be coming up, especially in prophecy, will be coming up again and again and again and again. So, that kind of makes sense when we look at it that way. And again, just because we look at the word cup in another book, it doesn't mean that we have to use the same symbolism in place. Again, we may see, as far as like Joseph in his cup of divination. So, no, it's not. It's just a literal cup, right? And so, but we can look at other places, and I'm not going to go over there, but like in the book of Job, it talks about the cup of God's wrath. We know it's the same thing because it talks about the same thing, cup of God's wrath. The same thing in the book of Isaiah. But let's go to the New Testament. Let's go to the book of Revelation. Boy, that's a book of God's wrath, isn't it? Okay, so Revelation chapter 14. And in verse number 6, Revelation 14 and 6, it says, Then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. A second angel followed and said, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives the mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. He will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. Now, is this the same thing as what's found in Jeremiah? Kind of.
It says the wine of God's fury.
Wine of God's fury, yeah. So it is similar, isn't it? And it's the same thing in terms of God's judgment. But is the judgment that's here the same thing as the judgment in Jeremiah? Well, no, because the book of Jeremiah, it's King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians being the instruments of God's judgment. Here it's something different, isn't it? But when you think about that concept of the cup of God's wrath, it's the same thing, okay? And so, you got to think, okay, this is symbolic. It's very similar as what we looked at over in the book of Jeremiah. There can be similarities because we read about, Babylon and how Babylon has fallen. Okay? But at the same time, we got to look at the context over in Jeremiah, the context here, and we say, no, wait a minute, that Babylon, that Nebuchadnezzar, that was judged, that's fallen. This is something different that we pick up on in the book of Revelation. Okay? And so when you look at that regard, you can kind of see that even when we go to book, we still have to keep the context within the book, but we can see once we look at the context of this book and the context of this other book, that is context of Jeremiah, context of Revelation, we can see how these similarities go. But we have to kind of keep them separate before we do it, right? Because if we don't, we can kind of run into some trouble. Let's go back to the book of Matthew. Okay? So, Chloe, not to look at the passage that you were talking about, but to look at a different passage, which is going to be somewhat the same, but Matthew chapter 20. In Matthew chapter 20, what we see is, at this time, there's a controversy with the disciples of who's going to sit on the right and the left-hand sides of the Christ when he comes into his kingdom. And so what we see in verse number 20, it says, the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, kneeling down and asked a favor of him. By the way, could anybody tell me who the sons of Zebedee are? There's two disciples who are brothers, James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Okay? All right, so James and John come with their mother and say, we want a favor. And so Jesus says, what is it that you want? She said, grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. So, we want it all stitched up as a family affair. Jesus, if you could just have one son at the right and the other son on the left, that's all I ask. I don't ask much.
And you wonder if they have any clue that she went and asked him that.
No, they did, because they're with him. And in another gospel, they're the ones that are doing the asking. So, they probably put their mother up to it. Okay. All right. So Jesus says in verse number 22, you don't know what you're asking. Jesus said to them, can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? Okay. Now again, literal or figurative? Figurative, right? That's pretty obvious. We're talking about a figurative cup. Now, should we take God's judgment as far as the meaning of it, found in the book of Jeremiah, found in the book of Revelation, and say anytime you see a figurative use of the cup, that it's talking about God's judgment? Okay, well, Jesus is saying, can you drink of the cup that I'm going to drink? What is Jesus referring to, first of all?
Him dying on the cross.
He's talking about his death on the cross. And if you think about it, was the wrath of God poured out on him on the cross? Yeah, because Jesus suffered for sins. Okay? All right. So, yeah, we could kind of say, all right, well, this is kind of talking about something very similar. And that is that we're talking about the wrath of God. And so he's asking, can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? And the answer is no. They're not going to do that, and they can't do it. But you notice that they say, we can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right and left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared from my Father. So wait a minute. Now are we going to say that the cup that Jesus is talking about is God's wrath? Because if that's the case, then James and John are going to drink from God's wrath. James and John are going to drink from God's judgment. And if you look over at the judgment that we're talking about in the book of Revelation, that's reserved for those who have the mark of the beast, is that the same thing? No, it's not. And I'm glad it's not, because, if James and John were going to be judged by God, then what about me, right? What about you? And so that's what I'm saying. You've got to look and say, okay, is it figurative? Is it literal? And within the context itself, does it bear out the same thing as in other contexts? Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, it kind of does, and it makes sense with what Jesus said about him drinking from the cup. But what about the other disciples? No, that doesn't make any sense at all. So you kind of see a little bit about, as far as Bible interpretation in the context of passages and how all of that works. Yeah. So I'm saying it really is a lot of common sense when you start out with the baseline of what did the original writer mean when God inspired him to convey that message to the original hearers. When we look at it in that regard and say, okay, well, what did Jeremiah mean? What did John mean in the book of Revelation? What did Matthew mean when he spoke this? And when you look at it that regard, you say, oh, okay, was he talking about a literal cup? Was he talking about a figurative cup? Was he talking about the same thing in Jeremiah? Was it something similar to Jeremiah? Was it something that has shades of it, but yet there's a little twist at the end? And that's what we've got. Okay? All right. I thought that was a good question.